tables, giant danishes, what have you, and come have some food for thought along with your food. I'm Mark Lagon. I'm president of Freedom House, and we're delighted to have you here. But it's not just Freedom House who's hosting you. It's a new consortium we have formed with pleasure with our colleagues from Democracy International, the Karr Center, the Asia Foundation, World Learning, IREX, and us. We're calling ourselves the Advancing Democratic Elections and Political Transitions Consortium, or ADEPT. We'll prove that we're ADEPT. Or at least thought people are giving it this panel today. As we look at efforts to extend the voice of civil society around the world and engage in political participation, there has been, of course, intense talk about the use of information technology, social media, the internet. Very often this conversation moves towards what is the slick new app, what is the means, and there's a kind of disembodied quality of this. And sometimes not enough discussion between those who have technical knowledge and civil society. I think our organizations are moving in the right direction individually and now collectively on this, but the premise of today's session is to look at election-related technology, look at how information technology can be used to boost political participation in election seasons and more generally, and not to look at things strictly in terms of isolated units, the app, but the larger ecosystem. How can you advance the voice of people in democratization in a way that is tailored to a particular setting, the nature of civil society and technology and the place where you're working? It's an exciting time with a great possibility of enhancing the voice of people in political participation. If estimates are true, the adoption rate for people connecting with the internet, particularly through mobile devices over the next 5 years, might bring 1 billion more people connected, able to assert their voice more. That could have a revolutionary impact on elections and democracy. In fact, it will have a revolutionary impact. I'm pleased today to have a colleague from our consortium with us. Connie Moon Sehat is with the Karr Center, and she'll be talking about this territory of applying tools in a larger ecosystem, speaking to some applications that have in fact been pursued by the Karr Center in places like Lithuania, East Timor, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. John Karr is with the Asia Foundation. He's the Senior Director for Digital Media and Technology Programs, and he's going to be looking at partnerships that the Asia Foundation has pursued in the electoral context of Indonesia. And then finally, Baldassaro is with Democracy International, where he's the Innovation Director, and he's going to be talking about election data and the use of open source data in the context of Tunisia, which we at Freedom House have been seized with as one of the most marked success stories in a world situation of the sliding of political and civil liberties in other places. So I'm going to ask each of you, in turn, an opening question, and you have some things you might want to share visually, but let me start with Connie, if I might. So, why did we put ecosystem in the title of this session? What does it mean to talk about an ecosystem? And more broadly, what is the open source impact on sustainability? I mean, widen the aperture of looking at things through a development lens or sustainability lens, and not only in the democratic government lens. What is the impact of open source data and technology?
Thank you so much for that. So good morning. thank you so much for having all of us here to talk about some of these questions. And so I've been thinking about this for a little bit now.
Andrew? Max, do you think you can get us?
Here we go. All right, cool. It's very nice to see a lot of warm faces, friendly faces, and in the crowd as well. So, this question of ecosystem when it comes to technology is always a little interesting to me. There's, I think, a lot of buzzwords that we're hearing right now when it comes to technology. You think technology, ecosystem, how do those actually mesh? But as we were mentioning too, this growing sort of market in mobile technology, I think, is truly transforming the way that we are interacting across the globe. To reference another statistic for people, Ericsson Technologies this past June just issued a report. They said that they have 1 billion mobile phones in Africa in sight now in terms of the growth for this year. They believe that 90% of smartphones by 2020 will actually be in Asia, Middle East, and Africa. And it's an incredible shift if we think about that kind of computing power to be transferred to what sometimes has been called the global south, et cetera, and so forth. With that in mind, I sort of wanted to share a little bit about the work that we're doing at the Carr Center with a particular technology called Elmo, and then return back to this question about what these terms, open source, sustainable, ecosystem might particularly mean. Because if you want to be sort of, maybe share some of the negative sides of some of these terminologies, for example, you can open source the worst recipe ever, like in terms of a very bad cake mix, and that is still open source. So what are we really meaning when we talk about these terms when they're floating around and trying to think about technologies and practice for democracy or international development? At the Carr Center, we have developed an open source software called Elmo, which is short for election monitoring. And basically, for those of you, I think for most of the room, you are familiar with elections, but just in case you aren't, when the Carr Center, along with other international organizations, are invited to go observe an election, what we're trying to do is to try and assess the quality of that election according to international standards or obligations. We don't want to hold a country accountable to things that they themselves haven't assented to, of course. And so we want to ask these questions in close alignment with, what are the commitments they themselves have signed on to, whether it has to do with UN treaties or particular regional documents or regional obligations for how transparent their election should be, for example. As you can imagine, a lot of these assessments need to be done in person, sometimes with regional officials, sometimes they can be done from the capital. But in the past, along with other organizations, our observers would be going out with paper checklists and trying to do the best that they could to write these particular things, and then go back and try to put this all into Excel. Starting about 2010, we wanted to take advantage of the growing use of availability of mobile technologies. And so we have this platform. It's a web platform that allows a creation, management, analysis of checklists, basically related to these processes, that is key to elections and human rights. So in other words, I think for a lot of you, you also may have this experience that there are all of these technologies out there. But what does it mean to try and customize or to think about the specific tailoring that might be required for key issues in human rights or key issues in elections? Trying to create that bridge is another process in itself. So we have built a system that's available via SMS, tablets, web browsers, Java 2ME apps, a whole range of different technologies to try and provide a real-time picture of results, especially on election day when the results are pretty critical or the observations from our teams are pretty critical, but also trying to transform that into broader data analysis. So just as a couple of screenshots to give a little bit of flavor, this is our dashboard from Nepal 2013. As you can imagine, Nepal is a very difficult terrain to work with, but in fact we had no problem getting data from across the country except for one particular location there. And with the technologies that we're piggybacking off of, whether it's tablets or SMS, people can collate hundreds of forms and then just wait till they're in an appropriate range and send them up. So as the elections were going on, every 30 seconds, our system was refreshing to report a view of the election results as our observers were seeing them. Were the ballot boxes empty? Was there intimidation that's happening within the polling centers? Just as another kind of quick view for illustrative purposes, we were also in Tunisia doing an international election observation. And so what we know is that what we wanted to do is create a system that's optimized for election observation, but we know that there's all these other wonderful technologies out there that do data analysis better than we do. So how about we create that bridge with Tableau, with Stata, with R, with statistical packages. And so that's what our teams did there. They used the Elmo technology to the best of what it was keyed for, and then we were like, how do we create these bridges to other technologies that do something, with much more insight, because that's what they're focused on. I think that's sort of this bridge to what I would like to talk about in terms of this, how do we recognize what we can do, and then how do we recognize what other people around the globe are doing with regards to these similar questions, and how do we leverage those relationships and those developments for a stronger technical presence with regards to some of these questions. So I just wanted to show this final shot in terms of where Elmo has been used so far, and also to kind of highlight what we have basically been participating with, but how, because it's an open source software, other organizations have just taken this and run. And sometimes we don't actually find out about it until after the fact. So in some of the countries here in blue, these are where we actively have gone out with Elmo, we've deployed, we've trained, we've either transferred that knowledge. But some of the things that I wanted to highlight were very recent developments. So for example, this past year for the elections in Lithuania, we had a group called White Gloves who just reached out to us and said, we heard you have this technology. Could we just get a preview, sneak into it? We just sort of want to see how it works. And so we're like, sure, we'll give you a test account. And then after 2 weeks, we just sort of peeked and we realized, oh, they've just uploaded over 800 observers to our test account. And they've already tested, basically, they've built 10 different forms and they've already tested them. So we just kind of called them back and said, what are you doing? He's like, well, we just thought we'd just go ahead and use this. Can we go ahead and run off and do this, port this to our server and do the election observation? It's an open source technology, so we were very happy for them to do that. And now we have forms in Lithuanian that could potentially be used as ways to observe in other kinds of contexts. Another example is East Timor. Again, an instance of Elmo that we weren't aware of about until the end of its deployment, which happened at the beginning of this year. The Ombudsman for Human Rights and Justice of East Timor, supported by UNDP monies, is trying to use wanted an M&E platform, a monitoring and evaluation platform. How is education happening in schools? What about violence against children in schools? What about violence against prisoners within the prison system? They wanted to have something that would help their own efforts in these priorities. And so they just said, we kind of wanted to add a special, one little blip to Elmo. Can we go ahead and do that? They were already doing it, and we said that's great, but I think they're going to donate the code back to us, and so now you'll be able to upload photos as well. As a final example, our DRC instance is something that we are actually building for the Catholic Church to help observe the local elections. We're scaling our SMS to reach 30,000 to 100,000 observers on election day. We just want to make sure that it's going to be working that way in an infrastructure for SMS where there is very little telecommunications support. Oh no, we did it again. Let's try again. Yeah. So I think I just wanted to, come back to these terms, the ecosystem sustainable and open source. And what at least we mean by it, and what we call open Elmo, in the sense that we recognize we have a technology that we're continuing to build at the highest standards, but there's also all of these different groups, whether they're civil society groups or sometimes they're cybersecurity technical groups like a Georgia Tech. We know that there are different groups with different expertise. How do we bring them together in a way that we can leverage each other's expertise and transfer, again, especially with this Democratic Republic of Congo instance, this is not our technology, it's their technology. So knowing that there are equal partners in this, knowing that they have their own questions when it comes to election day, how do we co-build something that can eventually also be shared with the rest of the international open Elmo community? I'll stop with that. Thank you.
engaged in this dialogue. John Karr, of the Asia Foundation. We were talking yesterday about how we might have this conversation, and what I wanted to ask you as you go into your initial remarks is, what are the challenges for making the ideal of open data being used for political participation in reality? How does the local technical developers and local civil society voices as communities, how do they come together? How do they get integrated?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me and thanks for joining us for this conversation. I am with the Asia Foundation, but I'm based in San Francisco. So we do a lot of work on tech-related projects and how they integrate with Asia Foundation programs, particularly things like elections. So it's great to be here and talk about election tech. To follow up on this idea of open source, I think one of the challenges is understanding different tools and different technologies, and actually the nomenclature as well, because open source is different from things like open standards. And open standards are actually really important. You're talking about the ecosystem. What do I mean by open standards? Well, it's important to data in particular, but if you've ever used your mobile phone to take a video and then drop it on your desktop and it plays back, or you drop it in your web browser and it also plays back, that's because all of the services that are being built today tend to sort of operate around these open standards, which are, in the case of video encoding standards. So there's something called H.264, which is a standard open mechanism for people to confidently build tools that they know will interoperate with other tools that other people build, maybe oftentimes in isolation from one another. So open standards are really important because that's also the same as it is for video, as it is for data. And there's a number of open standards that allow people to build data solutions that can talk to other data solutions that have been built in other parts of the world with no collaboration or coordination with the developers in question. So JSON is an example of an open standard. And so understanding the importance of those kinds of tools, JSON is a data exchange format for databases to talk to one another and exchange data without having to go through lots of customization and programming. That's actually a really important piece of this puzzle that we call an ecosystem. So without common languages, it's impossible to have an ecosystem. So that's one thing. And then for me, working in Asia in particular, one of the big challenges is we all have this vision for civil society and for organizations like the Karr Center and EI and Asia Foundation and others working in this space to promote civic tech. But in a developing country context, the capacity isn't there for civil society organizations, and actually most of the best programmers and developers are in the private sector, and they're not going to come over and work at a civil society organization. So what's the sustainability model for that? How do you create an environment in which you can invite developers into your technology program, but also lighten the load a little bit, provide them with a little bit more latitude so that when they come in, their investment of their time and energy is optimized, because you're probably not going to be able to hire these people for the long term. They're not leaving the private sector. So that's a challenge. So I'm going to talk really quickly about something that we did in Indonesia, which is an election civic information program, which again integrated into a much larger Asia Foundation program that supported the parliamentary and presidential election in 2014. Amazing statistics for the country of 250 million people. There's 187 million eligible voters, 22 million first-time voters, and for the national and provincial level, something like over 30,000 candidates during the 2014 contest. So what is the challenge that we were trying to address really very specifically was how to deliver information on these candidates to the voting population. And of course, technology is not the silver bullet, it's just one complementary piece of more traditional civic information campaigns. But we saw an opportunity here. The opportunity was related to the tremendous modernization of the Indonesian society in the last 5 years. And I'm talking about mobile adoption rates usage, internet penetration in Indonesia, where citizens are participating in Facebook and Twitter in really new and exciting ways. I think the stats are in a country of 250 million people, there's something like 280 million mobile subscriptions. You know, how is that possible? Well, a lot of people have 2 or 3 phones, but there's probably at least 100 million unique subscribers in Indonesia, and probably something like 40 or 50 million smartphone users. That's a huge demographic. They're all connected to data networks that are always on and always wired, and so they're able to participate in Facebook, they're able to participate in Twitter, they're able to use apps. And so that was an opportunity for us that we really thought long and hard about how to solve this problem. Now, it wasn't that the country of Indonesia, the government, wasn't committed to open data and really supporting access to information in Indonesia around the election. The Election Commission was very committed to this. They have a great website. They made a concerted effort to reach the population with other traditional approaches. But again, technology changes really rapidly, and even though Indonesia is evolving and changing quickly, the capacity of local government, national government, civil society to adopt standards, open platforms, new approaches, responsive websites that can be viewed on mobile devices. Getting quickly to that point in which you can launch products like that is a challenge. For the reasons that I mentioned before. So I'm going to quickly go through some more slides because I don't have much time. Yeah, just completely ruined this. How do I?
This is a truly collaborative consortium.
I apologize. Touching me or the button. Okay, so I mentioned the KPU, the Election Commission in Indonesia. They did have a website, and it was very comprehensive. They had hundreds of thousands of pages of documents online that you could access. They're primarily in PDF format, which is a problem because it's an unstructured document format that only people can read. Machines can't read those documents. And also, if you ever tried to look at one of these PDF documents on your mobile phone, which is the primary access point for most people in Indonesia, you know how hard it can be, right? So it's not an optimal situation for distributing content online. Again, a good faith effort made by the Election Commission, but something that is suboptimal from the modern web's perspective. Just to give you an example of the number of steps you have to go through just to get information on a candidate. I counted 6 just to get a biography of a candidate, stepping through the provincial level, down to the capital of the constituency, to the party list, to the actual PDF document that contains the biographical information of the candidate. So that gives you a sense of the challenge there. And again, I want to stress what PDF documents really are. They're non-machine readable. So even if I had all 100,000 of these documents in a shoebox somewhere and I wanted to put them into a computer doesn't know what to do with these documents because it's not encoded in an open standard. Right? It's not structured in a way that a machine can read. So what did we do? Well, we worked with and I want to stress how exciting it is to work in Indonesia because civil society is very engaged as well on these issues. We worked with a great organization called Karr to collect all of these documents, to think about them a little bit, and to extract all of the data from the PDF documents, structure that data, and then inject it into a database that lived in the cloud. So we organized it along a set of key things that we thought voters would be really interested in, candidate information. They would want to know the district and what the map of the district looked like. They might have election law questions. They might be interested in news feeds. And some of this is a little messed up because this is a slide from the presentation, so I apologize. But the point is, taking unstructured data and creating structure and putting it in the cloud. And then the next step for us was to, again, this idea of local developers and lightening the load for local developers, making it possible for them to participate in these kinds of initiatives. What we did next was we built what's called an API on top of that database. That's an application programming interface. A technical term, which basically is like an application that sits on the database that uses an open standard for data transactions that everyone already understands and already knows in the developer community. JSON, much like the video standard that I mentioned, there's a data standard for data exchange between machines. So the API allows developers to build applications very easily. They don't have to deal with parsing the PDFs, dealing with building their own database. All of that stuff was something that we worked on with our partner Parallel and with great consultation with the Election Commission. So I'm just going to really quickly go through this. So if anyone who's a developer is in the audience, you might know a little bit about this. We did a lot of documentation around the API. We had a GitHub site with quite an extensive set of documents that describe if you want to build an application using candidate information, here's how you do it. All you have to do is string out your app to point to this database, and we'll send you the information, whatever you want. You query this database along in compliance with our documentation, and you'll get information back. That's what I mean by taking the load off of developers' back. Then they can focus exclusively on building front end, design, user experience, user interface. So it's no longer this question of, oh, I can't figure this website out, I can't get to these PDF documents. The talent of the local developers can focus on building solutions that voters can actually use. We handle the data with our partner, Parallel. They handle the application development. And then we had hackathons. So this is the next and interesting part. Once the API was up, once the database was there, we invited anyone who wanted to join in this effort to come and build apps. So we had several hackathons in Indonesia for the election. The first of their kind for elections and for civic tech in Indonesia. We had tremendous participation, over 500 of the best and brightest. And I'm quite serious about this. Really wonderful young people came who, again, you can't burden with the parsing of election information, but if you ask them to come for 48 hours to build that one piece of this puzzle, they can do it, and it's really incredible. So the idea, again, is one data store, many application interfaces, many apps, websites, all kinds of really exciting tools can be built using this methodology, and it's not just election data. It can be any kind of data that the public wants access to. As a byproduct of our hackathon, we had over 40 fully functional apps, and I'm not saying they were prototypes or they were design models or wireframes. They were real apps, and you could download them from the Google Play Store. And they actually allowed you to search through 30,000 candidates or identify your capital, your election district. We had mashups, Google Maps, combining the data along with the map information in the database, overlaying Google Maps and that was a great outcome. And if you want to go look and maybe you've got an Android phone, you can go to pennylouapps.org and download any of those remaining apps. They're a little antiquated at this point. It's 2014 election information. But just to wrap up, what's really great, again, about the way that we work at the Asia Foundation is we do work locally with our local partners. And Parallel has really taken this forward. As we've stepped away, they've continued to add API endpoints and data sources. You can, again, go to the developer page for that and look at the documentation for all kinds of new resources that they are building on and expanding. And they're also doing lots of really exciting work with the Election Commission and with local election officials, training them about open standards and open source, APIs and databases. And we hope that this has kind of opened this broader conversation with the government about, of course, we all want open data, we all want open government, and we all have ideals and we all dream about this possibility that is right there before us, but it's hard to get there. There are some ways to do it that are easier than others. And so that's kind of where we left it with Parallel, and you can see we're taking it quite far. So lots of, I'll emphasize one thing. Okay, here's the last statistic. Our database in 2014 was hit over 100 million times. And through the API, we were able to identify over 7 million unique users of the database. So again, it's a way to expand and complement existing civic information efforts. But as countries like Indonesia and elsewhere, they modernize and they get on the web, and that 1 billion people come online in 5 years, this becomes more and more practical and more and more reality for the kind of work that we do.
Thank you. Michael Baldassaro, what are your insights from Democracy International, particularly in the Tunisia case, about how you work with civil society to go from open data for political participation?
Thank you.
You're all tech people.
We're all.
I'll just cycle through.
Yeah, just keep going.
Don't hit any other buttons.
Just don't.
Yeah.
Just hit it one more time.
Someone else. Yeah.
It'll imprint.
All right.
Mine plays automatically. So just sort of to pick up on the question, I think that one thing that we need to do in the INGO community is we need to find ways to leverage each other's work more. Open data provides this really great opportunity to do that. I mean, it is a common resource that we can use in the international development community. I've worked in the field for the better part of the past 12 years, and there's so much siloing and stovetyping of technology. We just pump stuff out, and we tend to work with blinders on to what each other are doing, and we don't really leverage the work that each other are doing for a common good. And I was in South Sudan very recently, and people were telling me that South Sudan is a data desert, and that you can't find information. And I was looking for information on how you could design a good voter education program in advance of the next elections. And so I wanted population data, I wanted eligible voter data, I wanted polling station data, I wanted data from the last elections, I wanted radio and mobile coverage data to really design a campaign. And I went to look for it, and there was nothing, and that was true. And so I started calling up different organizations, and sure enough, everybody had this data sitting somewhere on their desktop, sitting somewhere on their server, all in formats that were completely different, nothing that was interoperable. Thanks to John and Connie for defining all the terms. So I ended up cobbling everything together, and I found there was a duplication of efforts in a lot of cases. Two organizations with funding from the same source were mapping schools, which were also polling centers. And you guys were doing the same work, and there was no common repository where people were putting this information so that everybody could benefit from that. So I think we need a bit of a cultural reorientation. Segueing into Tunisia, so for the Tunisia election data project, Tunisia election data is a project that seeks to collect, open, analyze, and visualize election data on an ongoing basis. The overarching goal of the project is to try to work with election stakeholders, mainly election officials, to try to use better information to drive decision-making that improves the process, really practical goal. And the lead of this coalition, it's a group effort, is a group called Mark Lagon, which is a Tunisian civil society group, which is dedicated to observing elections and engaging election reform. The initial election data platform was actually built on the back of work that was done by a group called Open Government Tunisia, Open Government TN. These guys had, during the 2000 election, volunteers collected and opened voter registration, turnout results data that was made available on the Election Commission's website, and they just stuffed it into a GitHub repository with no goal for what to do with it. When I arrived in Tunisia with Democracy International in 2012, I met with Mark Lagon, and they were very interested in engaging an election reform campaign in advance of the elections that happened last year. And they wanted to use data to underscore the need for certain things to happen. And one was that the need to increase voter registration. Only about 50% of the eligible a strategy for how to develop a Tunisia election data platform that could make data open, but also make it meaningful and present it to people in a way that would actually influence decision making. We brought in a great company here in DC called Development Seed to advise on the strategy. They work with international organizations to help them do things with their data to actually make it impactful. So we engaged them to advise on strategy. So we worked very closely with Rocky Moon at BI to help them analyze that data. Development Seed worked very closely with volunteers from Tunisia to try to make it meaningful. And so it was a really good collaboration between 4 organizations to try to put together one project. In 2013, or late 2013, this next go on. So late 2013, we were working to make the platform live, and we ultimately worked with Mark Lagon to get 4 or 5 initial visualizations out to on the platform. And, one of the most compelling ones is that we broke down the voter registration information into the smallest level that was available. And so one of the we have 264 delegations, which are the equivalent of counties, for lack of a better term. And so we were working to visualize that data down to such a micro level. And what you saw from that data was that there were these trends where in the coastal areas and the urban areas, you had significantly higher levels of voter registration. Whereas in the rural areas, the central parts of the country, this seems very logical, where access to information is lower and infrastructure is weaker, they had significantly lower numbers of voter registration. So the difference was 70 to 80% in coastal areas, 20 to 30%, 40% in some areas of the influence. And that seemed extremely unfair. And so it made the argument for where the Election Commission needed to target its resources to increase voter registration, to make sure people's voices were heard. Another visualization was the canceled ballots. And when you did the canceled ballots or the invalidated ballots visualization, you saw a similar trend in that areas where there were lower levels of literacy, you had higher numbers of invalid ballots. And so in Tunis, the capital, 1 out of every 100 ballots was invalidated, whereas in another area called Kef in the rest of the country, 1 of 20 ballots was invalidated. So not only did these people have lower levels of voter registration, they had higher numbers of canceled ballots. And so the press conference for the launch of this platform, the Election Commission head himself actually came and he wanted to speak. He asked to speak, and he called the project serious, helpful, and intelligent. And he actually asked Rocky Moon if they could help to map the polling centers. One thing that they didn't do before the 2011 elections was map the polling centers. They just developed responsibility to regional bodies to say where should we have polling centers. They weren't using data to do that. And so we worked with Rocky Moon and OpenGov to map all 4,800 plus polling centers during the elections over the course of a 2-month period. We provided that to the Election Commission, and they used that to determine, in addition to voter registration data, voter eligibility data, where should they put additional voter registration centers, where should they put additional polling centers. They added about 100 different centers, which was impressive, mostly in rural areas, using that data. One of the other ancillary benefits of the project is that the Ministry of the Interior used the data to deploy security. They used that map to be able to keep polling stations safe on election day. The Ministry of Education was extremely happy to be able to use that because they wanted to map the schools for years. And so, since polling centers are schools, this was a really great byproduct of it. And so we were happy to oblige on that. And other election observation groups used it to be able to deploy. And we used it to create a polling center finder app so that people could find where to register, where to vote. And so it had multiple benefits. 2/3 of Tunisia is online, so it seemed a pretty practical thing to do in that environment. After the elections were over, the Election Commission had an interest in making data open to the extent possible. They did not have the resources, they did not have the capacity to do it, and so they turned it over to Rocky Moon and OpenGov Tunisia. Said, guys, here are all 11,000 plus polling station results forms. Can you make them open for us? And of course, we obliged. We worked with them to open every single piece of data. 15 volunteers trained by OpenGov over the course of 2 months, put every single piece of data, converted into CSV and JSON format. We created created an API so that anybody could access that information if they wanted the results, or just a segment of results from either a constituency or from a polling party or whatever it may be. And so that was made available on the Tunisia election data platform. And it actually unwittingly set a precedent. This is the highest level of transparency of any election in the Middle East region. There's no other election commission or there's no election data that's made that granularly available anywhere in the region. So it's actually a pretty positive benefit that we didn't realize at the time. It's all open and available for people to use. Everything on the platform is documented. There's source attribution for where it all comes from. All the data is on GitHub, where it's licensed in the Creative Commons most permissive license for reuse, so anybody can use the data if they want. There's documentation. There's a methodology section. There's a methodology section which details how you could create these exact same visualizations using the data. So it's 100% open. We've documented, sourced, licensed, everything. And it's something that we're really proud of. And it's actually influenced our project in Lebanon. So there's a Lebanon election data project now that was built in the backend. So it's spreading, and we would love to find ways to support more of that.
Thank you. And wanting to move soon to our audience for your questions, in game show style, I'm going to ask a general, broad question and ask you each to make one kind of intervention or observation. Michael, you kind of raised this territory of international civil society, international NGOs. So part of the ADEPT Coalition's idea is to have a new collaborative approach. Not scrambling for funding at each other's expense, synergies, looking for avoiding duplication. Okay, so in the world of the international NGO community, what one thing would each of you say we need to worry about to fostering a real ecosystem of change for political participation? What things do we need to do in the international civil society realm to bridge the technical side and the civil society side on our part? Or in the sort of international NGO world, if you think of it as the development community, what needs to be synced with standards emerging? What one thing would you each say we need to do at our end of international civil society? Any observation you did not get to make in your initial remarks? Do you want to start?
I'll start. Just to sort of pick up, and it's going to sound a little bit trite, but it's sort of a don't instead of a do.
Good.
My don't is
Bad practice.
We understand. Understanding the ecosystem is something that we don't always do in the first place. We're trying to learn the ecosystem and get comfortable with it, or respect it for that matter. I think that the thing that we need to be mindful of, and I call it the no dumping policy, is no dumping or littering in the ecosystem with proprietary software that is only good for one election, one time. We've done that for years where we built some sort of database that's used by a group once, and then we put the code in a closed repository. You might as well put it in a casket because it is dead. That project is never going to be useful. You spend a lot of money on something that nobody else can use, and so it's better to use open source. You don't build proprietary Elmo, and Elmo exists, and you can contribute to it and reuse it and make it better. There's no reason to do that. And it's the same dumping policy with just dumping. We'll dump technology, into hardware, into environments. We bring tablets and computers and smartphones that are not native to the environment in which we're working. We just dump it on civil society groups because it's cool and it's awesome. But it's not native, it's not familiar, it's not user friendly, nor is it reliable. And there's a very good chance that the infrastructure can't handle it. And so we're overwhelming the infrastructure of the environment that we're working in. And so I guess I would say, we as the international development community need to stop littering, prevent littering. That would be my one.
So, the other two of you, what best practice or what best practice to avoid?
Practice to avoid.
Either way, Michael's decided to be a practice to avoid, but what one cue would you give to the international community, international civil society, international development community in this territory?
Don't build for the web of 10 years ago, build for the web of today. The open web has changed. Cloud has made it possible for small interventions to have enormous scalable server, you had to buy a person to manage that system. You had to do a whole host of upfront capital-intensive investments to get started on a technology project. And all of that's been obliterated by the cloud, by Amazon Web Services, AWS, or Google App Engine. You can build, prototype, and deploy in the cloud, and it's got almost zero marginal cost to get into it, get going, and start iterating. And that's something that I'm not sure everyone gets in the international community. You don't have to buy people machines now. Our project in Indonesia was very low cost. And I think the only piece of equipment that we bought was the prize for the hackathon.
Excellent. So Connie, in this world of the international NGOs that deal with civil society questions, development questions, and technologies, do you have a best practice or an avoidable best practice to highlight?
I have the best one, I think.
Good.
I think we need to nurture brave two-way communication. And what I mean by that is that technologies are here and they're growing, they're changing. I mean that on two levels. One, in the sense that, how do I put it? I think with a truly open source approach, we should be opening ourselves to critique as much as to innovation. So in this sort of no jumping policy, in this sort of like building for today, not yesterday, the drive to be open source is to share, but also has to be willing to take the critique and say, how do we build something together better? So you can only do that if you have, I think, brave vision, but also the willingness to take the critique and move it forward in a truly collaborative way at the international level. I think that's also true for our partners at the civil society level. We want them to be co-partners with us, and that means in this sort of a brave and nurturing communication that we will be giving them the infrastructure, the documentation, all of the training, not just sort of saying, here's our injection of technology, now we're going to leave, but how do we sort of raise them up to be there and to also maybe critique us too in terms of these things so that the next time we're coming back with learned lessons into something that's actually another stage.
Great. We may go a little bit longer than the scheduled 10:30. If you have to go, slip out, that's fine, but I want to make sure that you have your opportunity to ask questions. So if you have a question to ask, we'll get you a mic, and I'd ask you to identify yourself, and if you could ask a question of a particular panelist rather than all the panelists, then we'll be able to get more questions. Please, we'll get you over here. Thank you.
Hi, very enlightening. My name is Mindy Reiser. I've been an election observer in the Caucasus and in Europe. And my question is about the Indonesia work. It's very exciting, but I'd like to kind of delve down a bit in terms of first, to pick up on the last comment, how is this promoted, particularly in the rural areas? And did you do any focus groups? Did you do any interviews to understand, particularly in the rural areas? Indonesia is huge. There are more remote places. What people thought of this? I have a feeling that the urban professionals grabbed onto this and liked it. I'm wondering about everybody else. And in terms of training people to get used to these processes, that's a whole other area. So your comments are welcome.
Sure. I guess, again, the thing that I said when we started was that we don't think of this as comprehensive or silver bullet. It's a core demographic that's going to grow in the next 5 years. And we're getting positioned for deploying these solutions more effectively. But to your point about the local context, I think it's really important to understand how we work. And that is we separated the data and the structuring of the data and the tools that we enable developers from the process of building a user experience. We left the user experience to local developers who are probably best suited to design for the mobile web. And again, we are targeting Android devices with our core strategy, so not everyone has an Android phone. We did have tools available to build for SMS, but they didn't get used very much because people are really excited about smartphones and developers want to build for them. And it is the future future because future funds are going to